affirmation that we have today is, I know the truth, and the truth will set me free. How many of you want to be free today? How many of you want to overcome the problems and difficulties you have in life? We all have problems and difficulties in life. And you know, sometimes we think if we just lived a certain way, or if we just thought a certain thing, or if we just did something, that all these things would just go away. But that's not the purpose or the meaning of life. And the meaning and purpose of life is not for things to go away, but for us to be able to deal with them and to come to more fully understand and realize what they have to teach us, to show us who and what we are. The affirmation is, I know the truth, and the truth will set me free. And the truth is that you and I are children of God, created perfectly in the likeness and image of God. And because of that, we have all of the resources, all of the graces, all of the strength, all of the ability that the Creator has to see the reality and truth of who and what we are. And not only see the reality and truth of who and what we are, but to see the reality and truth of what others are, and the reality and truth about the world. We have a question for you today. The question is, what assumptions do I make about myself, others, and the world? There are reasons to make assumptions. There are reasons to make assumptions. Because as we make certain assumptions about ourselves and the world and others around us, we allow the creative power and the kind of gut feeling that we have within us, which is that infinite or divine source within us, to speak forth. But what this is talking about is the general assumptions. We think they're right, but they're mistaken. And they're mistaken because they don't come from assumptions that are based upon the understanding and realization of the truth. And the truth is that all things are working together for good, and we have a tendency to get out of alignment our thinking with that which we believe. We think certain things, but that's not consistent with our beliefs. And our assumptions many times are based upon this difference. I'll give you an example. There's a story about a little boy who had a terrible sore throat, and he didn't know, he was having an awful time. He could hardly speak. He was coughing. He was in a lot of pain. His mother finally decided after 2 or 3 days, this is terrible, this is bad. We really have to do something, so we're going to have to go to the doctor. And so she said, tomorrow we're going to the doctor. And as they spoke to the little boy, one of the things he said is, well, I have to have a shot. So they wanted to tell him the truth. They said, I don't know, maybe you will. Oh my goodness, that was the end of it. He just went hysterical. He was beside himself. He was going to have a shot. He continued in this issue about the shot, and she said, why are you so concerned about the shot? And he said, I've never had a shot in my throat before. That was his assumption. That was his assumption. And she said, oh, wait. He won't give you a shot in your throat. He'll give you a shot in your arm. Oh, that's fine. I can do that, but not in my throat. How many people have said, I don't go there because every time I go there, something bad happens. So they don't go there. The assumptions that we create. And the assumptions that we create, especially the negative assumptions that we create in our minds and in our hearts, are so out of proportion with what we believe and know. Because what we believe and know is that we are children of God, created in the likeness and image of God, with the limitless resources that God has. You know, the assumption was that the world was flat. That assumption proved to not be true, but everybody believed it. What do they believe? They believed if we sail out too far, we're going to fall off the edge. Now that seems ridiculous. And yet we make all kinds of assumptions about what's going to happen in daily life. Every time we read the paper, our assumption is this or that about what's going to happen. Every time we read about politics or the goings-on in the world, that's what we make these assumptions. Every time we know somebody's political affiliation or religious affiliation or ethnic background, we make assumptions. We make those assumptions based upon our experience, our knowledge, what people have told us, but it's not always based on truth. The question that we ask right here, what's the question? What assumptions do I make about myself and others in the world? Jesus, the assumption of his day was, we are here and God is there. We are here and the Messiah is going to come back and is going to make the world a big, wonderful place of peace, and all these things are going to happen. Those were the assumptions. That was the belief. That was the truth of the day. And what do we know? He came and he said, it's not true. Where did he say God is? Within. What did he say? God, the relationship that we had with God. God the Father. Wow, that was blasphemy. How dare anyone refer to God as Father? Now we think of that today and we think, how could anyone think of God as not a Father, a presence of love? But in that day, no, God was a little distant. The reality is that many of the assumptions that we make theologically, politically, personally, economically, financially, they just aren't true. And they aren't right. We have a quotation. It's from Eric Butterworth. And Mr. Butterworth said, "Our job is not to set things right, but to see things rightly." We make those assumptions so many times to make things right, to create justice. And there are certain things over which you and I have control, and there are others that we have no control over. Doesn't mean we don't have concerns, doesn't mean we don't have thoughts, but the reality is that we only have the ability to make certain changes, and the biggest change that we have the ability to make is within ourselves and within the way that we think about circumstances. That has to do with the assumptions. And if we make assumptions based upon the law of life and the presence and power of God, then we assume things totally differently. Then we begin to feel differently, we begin to act differently, we begin to share differently, we begin to reflect differently, we begin to radiate differently the thoughts and the ideas of who and what we are. The reality and the truth is that we make assumptions all of the time, and most of the time those assumptions are wrong. And what we should do is probably make less assumptions and instead operate from the standpoint of truth. And as Mr. Butterworth says, to see things rightly. To see things rightly. And if we look at it rightly, we see beyond the appearance of what we assume. You know, a few years ago, I was going to die if I didn't have a transplant. And that ability to see beyond that did nothing but allow me to step out of the situation, out of the fear, and out of the agony, and out of the turmoil, and out of the depression, and out of it into the reality and truth. This is what it is. And it takes some practice to get our thoughts aligned with our belief. You know, there's an old New Thought term of standing guard at the gates of the temple. Standing guard at the gates of the temple. That means stand guard at the gates of what's coming into your mind. And don't let anything in this temple, this sacred temple here that starts with the brain and runs through the body and all the way through, that is not true. Just understand and realize who and what we are, and claim that and know that that's true in our lives. The good news is that we don't have to assume a single thing, that God and infinite intelligence is as true and real as the air around us, even though we don't see it. And every assumption that we have that defeats us can be put aside. And our thinking is all too often in our assumptions low. And what we need to do is think higher, to raise our thoughts from those negative assumptions about people and places and things and ourselves, and claim the truth of who and what we are. And this week, look at how many assumptions you make, and how many assumptions that you have made totally based on nothing that is foundational at all. It's just something you've come to assume. So this week, go out and assume the best. Go out and assume great good. Go out and see that your thinking is right, and that you are rightly thinking according to the teaching. And if you do, your life will change in a wonderful and magnificent way.